Welcome back, guys. This is going to be very bullish for Bitcoin. All right, so today I want to share with you something that cuts through the noise of short-term market moves and temporary headlines. Because while most people are trying to react to this latest CPI print or a tweet from a Fed official, how stinking boring is that? They're missing the deeper and more permanent shift happening beneath the surface of the global economy, okay? So this isn't just like, oh yeah, the Fed didn't do anything today. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Short-term stuff doesn't matter. And one of the clearest voices speaking to that shift right now is Ray Dalio. So on April 28th, 2025, Dalio published a post that 2 weeks later hasn't aged a day. In fact, it's arguably more relevant now than when it was first going live, okay? And why is that? Because he's not talking about this week's inflation data or next quarter's earnings season. No. Okay, he's talking about structural, long-term changes to the world order. Things like the breakdown of US-China trade interdependence and the unsustainability of the US debt and the slow fracturing of the post-World War II monetary system and trade systems. Okay, let's unpack what Dalio actually said, why it's resonated so strongly, and how it ties directly into crypto and the future of money. This is really ridiculously bullish, okay? He first called out the breakdown in global trade relationships, specifically between China and the United States. For decades, the two nations were locked in a kind of codependency. The US consumed, China manufactured, and trade deficits were accepted as the cost of keeping inflation low. That era is finished, guys. Tariffs, tech bans, export restrictions, these aren't negotiation tactics anymore. These are signs of distrust, and they're pushing the global manufacturers to reduce exposure to the US altogether. Dalio pointed out that major companies are already pulling back. Jaguar, Land Rover, and Audi, for example, recently paused US exports because of tariff concerns. That's not political theater. That is a realignment in motion. Okay, so he also warned again about the accountability of US debt. The US dollar is still the world reserve currency, but the underlying trust in that system is definitely weakening. The US now owes almost 37 trillion in debt. I don't think you understand how much that is. That's $37,000 billion. And that number is climbing rapidly. Interest payments on the debt are outpacing spending on core services like defense and Medicare, and the only viable options left are painful: raise taxes, cut spending, or devalue the currency. They're going to choose devalue the currency. You guys already know that. But none of these options are politically popular. So the path of least resistance is the quiet one: inflate the debt away. That means the dollar becomes worth less over time, as it has been since 1913 and 1971 when Nixon took the US off the gold standard. It also means other countries, especially trade partners like China, are emerging economies and increasingly asking, why should we keep storing value in US debt? Dalio calls this the world bypassing the United States, and he's not wrong. We're watching the rise of alternative trade systems, bilateral deals in yuan, rupees, rubles, or digital currencies. Central banks are stockpiling gold. BRICS nations are floating the idea of a shared settlement system. This is de-dollarization, not as a prediction, but as a process already in motion. He also addressed deglobalization. This is one of the most important trends that's rarely talked about, and honestly, after the 1990s and early 2000s, global supply chains stretched across borders in pursuit of efficiency, but now countries are choosing redundancy over efficiency, which is pretty incredible to see. Security over profits, and that means trade is localizing, investments is shifting, and the dollar's reach is definitely shrinking. All this ties directly into why Bitcoin and the broader crypto ecosystem really matters right now. In the replies to Dalio's post on X, users like Jeff Park pointed to de-dollarization and inflation risks. Others connected it to Bitcoin's rise, and they're definitely right to do that. Because if we're entering a world where governments print money to cover debt and where geopolitical tensions fracture the old financial pipelines, people are going to look for neutral, decentralized alternatives. Bitcoin isn't perfect, but it's permissionless, borderless, finite, and doesn't require trust in any one government or central bank, which is really good news. Now, this isn't theoretical anymore. It's happening. One user on X, Sightbringer, called Dalio's post a final warning, not because some catastrophe happening tomorrow, but because of the structures of the past are no longer holding. He talked about capital controls, trade fragmentation, and the rise of a multipolar finance. And all these things are already starting to show up. The most striking thing is nothing in the 2 weeks since Dalio's post has challenged this message. There's been no fiscal reform in the US government, no reversal in global trade patterns. If anything, the silence is the loudest confirmation of what he warned about. So there really hasn't been anything out there. And that's why this conversation matters right now. If you're watching the markets and trying to figure out what's coming next, this isn't the time to only think in quarters, okay, like most people on Twitter. Okay, this is the time to think about in decades. The world is shifting from unipolar to multipolar. Okay, from global to fragmented, from trust-based systems to trustless systems like Bitcoin. Crypto lives in that shift. It was built for that shift. Thank goodness we have an opt-out of that. Bitcoin's privacy coins and permissionless protocols are tools that give each individual sovereignty in a world where institutions are losing their grip. And the more these macro cracks appear, the more governments lean on control, inflation, and surveillance, the more valuable these tools become. So if you're here right now paying attention, you're way ahead of the curve. Don't waste that position. So with that said, I expect the Bitcoin price to absolutely explode further as more and more smart money out there starts getting involved. So anyways, check out learningcrypto.com if you want to see what we are buying, what we are selling. If you want to understand this market a little bit better than the average person out there, definitely check out learningcrypto.com. Talk to you soon.